Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Lincolnshire Integrated Care Partnership. Could we have apologies for absence, please, Katrina?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Mrs Bradwell, Councillor Marfleet, Councillor Rawlins, Sir Andrew Cash, but we have Jerry McSorley here as his sub, Dr Kevin Thomas, Elaine Bayliss, Kevin Lockyer, but we have Sharon Robson here as his sub, Philip Clark, Dean O'Dell, and Neil Juster, but we have James Beattie here as his sub. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Declarations of members' interest. Do I have any members who need to make a declaration of interest? I'll take that as a no. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. And this is to confirm that the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of March, pages 5 to 8 of our pack, are a correct record. Is there a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Bowkett. Can I take Councillor Wright as a seconder? Thank you. All in favour? Please raise your hands. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Moving on to item 4, which is the action log, and again, that is simply for noting. Does anyone have any comments? I take that as a no. Moving on to Chairman's announcements, I don't propose to read through these and take them as read. Any comments at all? Nope, that's fine. And so I move on to our first report, which is the Lincolnshire Autism Strategy and the Year 1 Work Plan. I'd like to introduce Sarah Connery and indeed welcome Emma Kay, who are going to hopefully present this item. So over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yes, afternoon everybody. We do have some slides, if people are happy to put those up. Thank you. So we're here today to present the revised all-age Lincolnshire Autism Strategy and Work Plan. We do have an existing strategy from Lincolnshire 2019 to 2022 for various reasons, COVID being one of them. In terms of being honest, a lack of ownership and resource to get behind the strategy. We have not delivered the intentions, so a lot of the refreshed strategy is built on those existing commitments that we made back in 2019. There is also a new national strategy dated 2021 to 26, and a result of that is that as a system we are required to have a system-wide strategy and indeed a system senior responsible officer, which is myself. So in terms of coming here today, there's a list of actions as noted there in the paper. I will apologise to members of the Integrated Care Board who have already received some of the presentation, but we have put a slightly different spin on it today given the amended audience. And I'd really like to offer my thanks to Councillor Woolley for agreeing to the executive forward as part of that strategy as well. It's really appreciated to get that support and commitment. So I'll just let Emma introduce herself.
So I'm Emma Dominy-Hill and I am the Autism Programme Lead currently for Lincolnshire as part-time role alongside my clinical role within LPFT.
And we were also, we were hoping to be joined by Callum, who has actually co-authored the strategy, unable to make it today, but we have got a little video clip which is on the next slide, where he has shared a poem with ourselves around his experiences. So if that could, we're hoping the technology will work.
Do you
Should we
want to
continue?
carry on,
Yes,
and then
in the
we'll
meantime.
find this
Yeah,
clip a little later?
Thank you. And we haven't circulated the slides in advance, but obviously we will after the meeting as well. So we will have to go on to the next slide if possible, please. So this, I'm not expecting anybody to be able to read this. It is quite a busy slide, but we just wanted to make sure that we were able to just highlight around autism. I'm a neurotypical person myself, as opposed to someone who is neurodivergent, so we can often make assumptions about the lives of autistic people. So autism is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition. The prevalence, research suggests between 1% and 2% of the population. So in terms of our local Lincolnshire GP data, that's around 11,500 registered as autistic. It is not a mental health condition or a disorder, although evidence suggests around 70% of autistic people do have additional mental health needs and 40% have intellectual disabilities as well. I think this is really important for us to consider as an integrated care partnership, given the cost to the UK economy of social exclusion of autistic people and their families and carers is estimated at £32 billion, which is the equivalent of cancer, stroke, and all combined together. So quite a stark statistic there. What we've also wanted to do here is highlight the significant health inequalities faced by autistic people. So there is a 16-year reduced life expectancy for autistic people, 9 times more likely to die by suicide, and a lack of understanding in health and care organisations and services, as well as wider society, does lead, for example, to diagnostic overshadowing, poor outcomes in education. Only around 20% of autistic adults are in employment, although people would want to, that to be higher. And what we've really tried to do as a result of this strategy is make sure that we're addressing those health inequalities, but really adopt a co-production approach. So as I said, members of our autistic community in Lincolnshire have authored this strategy and also the solutions and the work plan within it. So I'll stop there and hand over to Emma. Thank you.
So next slide, please. So we've got a little few slides now really about where we've been, where we are currently and where we're going, what our ambition is as a Lincolnshire system that we're hoping you're going to be signing up to. So where we've been, we've had quite limited diagnostic services across the lifespan. We've had children, young people diagnostic services for some time, but actually they haven't always been NICE compliant previously. And we didn't have any services for adult diagnostics until about 2-3 years ago. So we've come from that place where there's been very little previously. We often have heard about limited support within schools, home and wider communities. Families continue to say that to us despite some of the changes we're making. Sarah's already talked about those significant health inequalities for autistic people, and there's a variety of reasons for that, particularly around lack of reasonable adjustments into health services, but also into wider community. One thing that's been really important to us is historically the autistic community in Lincolnshire have felt really, really disempowered. They felt unheard, they felt misunderstood, and they felt really angry about that. So there's perhaps been quite a lot of work done over the last year really to re-engage and to build that trust with the community, that we are trying to change things, we want to do the right thing, and I think as Sarah said, being open and transparent where there's been difficulties and we haven't done that, and not kind of breezing over things. So actually that has been quite a significant change for us. Historically, we've had inappropriate length of stay for mental health hospitals for autistic people and people with a learning disability. And when they go into hospital, they go in more readily and they'll stay there longer, including in out-of-area beds. So it's something that we're really looking at in terms of addressing as a wider system with particularly our local authority colleagues around kind of community support. There's also quite a limited understanding of how we might support autistic people in employment. Again, Sarah talked about the figures in terms of employment of autistic adults. And actually, we do know that many autistic people want to be in employment if the right circumstances, the right reasonable adjustments are made for them. So next slide, please. So where we are now, we've done quite a lot of work, as I say, in the last year, 18 months, building up to the new strategy, really. Thinking about this, as in the last strategy, about an all-age approach. It's meeting the needs of children, young people and adults, and older adults, which have been a community that's been quite forgotten about in the past. Really focusing, thinking about that early identification and support. And as I say, a big piece of work about re-engagement with the community. So everything we are designing is co-designed, it is co-produced. Everything we do, autistic people are at the heart of that, and trying to build the views of the widest autistic community, because obviously lots of views within that, and they can be quite diverse. But that's the way we are wanting to move forward, and we are moving forward, so it's at the heart of everything. Huge focus on reasonable adjustments. It's not always about providing specialist support, specialist education, specialist health options. It's actually about what can we do in wider society to reduce those health inequalities by providing those reasonable adjustments, making adjustments in wider society. So it's accessible for autistic people. And I would say if we get it right for autistic people, we're going to get it right for everybody else. So it's actually got a wider benefit to society as well. A real focus on proactive rather than reactive strategies. So when we're in a bit of a pickle in the country and in Lincolnshire, there is a tendency to focus on those reactive responses, trying to fix things quickly, but not necessarily well or cohesively or systematically. So there's been a real focus about that proactive thinking, and thinking really about the kind of, for us, non-clinical, non-health opportunities within this. So all of that's led to work around improving our access to our diagnostic services, improving that NICE compliance. We're not there yet, but we're heading towards it. Real focus, particularly from the local authority, about improving support within education. A number of examples of work that's happened around that, our working together team, training that's gone out. And also big commitment from our health colleagues and our integrated care board about reducing those inpatient admissions and reducing length of stay, which is really important. Next slide, please. So where we're going. So we know we've done some work, we know some good bits have happened, but there's still quite a lot more to do, really. Big focus for us will be big three that we're looking at over the next 5 years is that all-age, accessible, NICE compliant neurodevelopmental pathway. So thinking about the diagnostics, where people are needing diagnosis, actually it's fully NICE compliant, it's easily accessible, and no matter who you are, you can get into it quite helpfully. But added to that, we know that all people aren't vacuums. Autism and being autistic often doesn't happen on its own. There are other co-occurring conditions. So thinking broader about neurodevelopmental pathways. That's thinking about things like ADHD, tics, Tourette's, and other co-occurring conditions. In the middle, probably because it's the most important really, is thinking about the community asset approach. So really focusing on non-clinical, thinking about wider society, having a step-on, step-off approach for lifelong support for autistic people from when they're born up until they die. And actually that support for them being available without referrals, without needing to go through big pathways to get there. Actually, they can access it in their library, in their leisure centre, in their school, in their employment, wherever that might be. And it's a step-on, step-off approach that we're looking at. And ultimately, all of that really, it's not about kind of the numbers and all the rest. It's about improving the actual experience of autistic people. So the goal for us, and the way we know we've made it, is that the feedback from the autistic community is we feel heard, we feel supported, we feel listened to. That's kind of what we're aiming for, really. And underneath there, you've got a range of solutions, really, that proactive thinking in terms of how we're going to reach our goal of where we're heading for. Next slide, please. So how we're going to get there, what we kind of need and what we need commitment from, particularly from this group and the wider leadership communities, I suppose, is an understanding of autism and autistic needs, putting to bed myths that are out there around autism that reduce, causes stigma, to reduce that stigma, to understand the impact it has on people and on society, and why it's important to invest in autistic people and in the needs that they have. Thinking about senior system leaders being committed to the agenda. So, there's a risk that actually it becomes quite a fractured offer from our system. I think that's happened historically. So it's about kind of senior system leaders across the whole system committing to the agenda. Listening to the community, it can be difficult sometimes when we've made mistakes to kind of hear what's happened and what we've kind of not done well, as much as it's nice to hear what we are getting well. But I think that collaboration, working together, not being frightened of that, is really, really important. Creative sources of funding. particularly thinking about the voluntary community social enterprise sectors, some really good examples out there already of where that's happening. And so there's not a reliance on public services and statutory provision. Actually, it's about embedding it, as I say, in the local communities. And really that kind of joint ownership, joint partner responsibility to meeting the goals and aims. So it doesn't become either a health or a local authority or beyond that individual priority sort of focus on it. It's more that collaborative approach, really. Next slide, please. So questions?
Questions? Anyone? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this. I've grown up around autism from a very early age, with family members, and it's interesting now to see how the language has changed, because back then it was people with autism, because you didn't want to brand them as autistic, which actually led to the big mistake being made then of people thinking they understand the spectrum and all the rest of it, and as if you pick and choose where they are on the spectrum. You know, having to explain to somebody that Asperger's is not the same as an autistic person's now is. It's not, you know, learning disabilities aren't the same, they're more focused. But that's because I know a little bit about it. I'm not an expert, I just know from experience. But most people don't know at all. And they just use this title, spectrum, you know, and they think, oh yeah, they're on the spectrum. And so they think that that makes them understand it. And what came from the district discussion is that as this evolves, I think there's very much a place for training. It'll be very much appreciated across the districts, especially with all our forward-facing teams, you know. So when you get somebody in there that you're trying to help, and if you don't understand what it is that's the obstacle to actually helping them, and it's because they've got autism or they've got Asperger's or they've got one of the other conditions, then it'd be very much appreciated. But I think at the moment a lot of society is now blind to this because we've got used to this phraseology and it needs drumming into. So when I first saw autistic person, I was like, whoa, because that it was always, don't call them an autistic person because you've labelled them and branded them, you know. And perhaps that's what it needs now, just to try and make people understand the difference and understand the scale of it. But no, I was very interested to read this. But as I say, it was shocking for me to suddenly go, right, so we've reversed everything from decades ago, you know, and is that the right way to go now? So really, I think I'd ask you that question as well. Do you think that's the right way to go, to call them autistic people rather than people with autism?
So where that's come from, and actually every autistic person, I'm going to talk about autistic people and I'll come to your question, but obviously it's individual to the person, like any identity. It's always about asking the person first. But the reason we're using the language autistic person, it's in the strategy, is that is predominantly the view of the autistic community, that they like to be referred to as autistic people. The reason they say that is because actually they don't park being autistic at the door. You can't take part of them off and then they're not autistic anymore. It's also a real big focus around neurodiversity, the fact that we're all different, and actually being autistic, it doesn't make you bad, worse, better, or anything else. It just makes you slightly different in how you think, how you experience the world. So the language changing was really their choice. It was the choice of autistic people, and that is kind of really what the research suggests out there, including for children and young people. Some big bits of research up in northeast of the country, where they've engaged with really broad sectors, and that is the terminology that that autistic people generally prefer to be used now. So that's an answer to that. In terms of training, absolutely. I think that is something it's embedded within there. You'll see it's in some of the work streams and some of the work plans that we've got going forward. So the Oliver McGowan mandatory training for autism and learning disability, it's a mouthful, is mandatory. It's within the adjusted version of the Health and Care Act. All health and social care settings that are CQC registered, all staff must do that training at some point, or be relevant, trained, and the Oliver McGowan is the one that's being promoted. So that's those settings. Beyond that, there's so much more, absolutely so much more. Lots has been done, but I think what you're probably experiencing is this, what I hear all the time. Whatever we do often can feel like a drop in the ocean because there's so much more to do. So I say the Working Together team within the local authority, they've done quite a lot in schools. There's been training for education providers. That's kind of one area. But there is so much more. And actually, autistic people potentially are some of the answer to this. They want, you know, in terms of employment, actually, why don't we look at employing autistic people to be delivering that training? That's an opportunity for us. It's embedded in our strategy and in our work plan. So,
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. 2 or 3 observations, if I might. The first one is particularly welcome the narrative and the tone of the narrative. With respect to my colleagues, I've come off a Christmas card list, I suspect. It doesn't sound like an officer has written it. It's been much more co-produced, and it's more powerful, in my view, as a consequence of that. It's a particularly welcome shift of style, I think, and one might hope that we could go elsewhere with that approach. The second thing is, a few years ago, there was an all-party parliamentary group looking at autism, and on the back of a year or two of the first requirement by government to have autism strategies. And it talked a lot about having a centre of excellence or a hub for every area. And I did probably push a point rather hard that it was a really bad idea. And that's because in a place like Lincolnshire, having one centre of excellence is likely to disenfranchise 90% of the population. So it's not a good idea. But the business model of a virtual hub seems to me particularly good and well placed conceptually, but does require us to work as a system. And if Councillor Bradwell was in the room, I think she'd rather pleased to see this as an all ages autism strategy, and clearly some priorities around children and young people as well. Notably, if we get that right, we're more likely to shift the employment numbers. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Glenn. Andrew.
Yes, thank you. And I suppose my comment builds on the final one that Glenn just said, and I think it's our role as employers. I mean, reading, particularly I think I'm on page 21, I think it is, about some of the strengths that autistic people have. And I was just reading the first 3 bullet points: strong attention to detail, above average technical or creative skills, character strengths such as honesty and loyalty. Why would we not want more people in our workforce with those character traits? So my sort of take-home message, an organisation that employs over 9,000 people, we need to do better. So I always like to take home at least one message from a meeting. That's going to be my one from this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Rob.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd just like to endorse Councillor Wright's comments about experience in the family. I have a family member who's recently been determined to be autistic, and I think the thing that struck me is Councillor Wright's comments about support and education for families and the community at large, because I think it can come as rather a shock or a surprise, or not necessarily a shock, but a learning experience is required for some families where they learn that a member of the family has been determined to be autistic. And I think support for families is very important in this case, and I welcome this report. Thanks, Chairman.
James.
Thank you very much, Chair. Further to the point really that was made about employers, and from a Greater Lincolnshire perspective, I'm sure that we would welcome further conversations about how we can engage with the private sector community and business community to further sort of spread this work. Not that I'm committing Neil, but I'm sure that he would be supportive.
Thank you. John. Yes, Sarah.
I just wanted to come in on that point. Thank you very much, James. And I have muscled in on the September LEP to talk about reasonable adjustment marks through the county for our local businesses. So thank you for the in.
Good. Right, John.
Thank you, Sue. I think that's a really good call, actually. So pleased to hear that's in train. Sarah, as you mentioned, you and Emma came to the recent ICB board and presented on this. I must say, I thought it was a top-class presentation, and the work that underpins it, I was really, really impressed with the way in which this has been designed and developed with people with autism. Got that right? Autistic people. Wrong again, John. But that really sort of shines out of the work and the approach taken, and I think contrasts significantly with previous attempts. So it's that whole co-production, doing with what works for you, what matters for you, rather than sort of the NHS or deciding what it's going to do for people, which is very, very welcome. It was comprehensively endorsed by the ICB, but I'd learned quite a bit that session. It really is true, isn't it, that we bracket mental health, learning disability and autism together, but they're three very, very different things. And I think there's just a bit of, for some of us, or certainly for me, perhaps a bit of lazy thinking around all of that. So the way in which you sort of shone a really bright light on the specific, you know, needs and presentation of people, autistic people, got it, was I think really good. I think, Richard, there's also something about how we do, or perhaps how Emma and Sarah do, actually just perhaps get on the road a little bit around the county in terms of district councils and others, because there's clearly an appetite that both you and Rob have described in terms of district councils maybe wanting to hear more about that and to understand and back it a bit more. But I think there's also a broader bit about all of our other partners across Lincolnshire that we work with, obviously the LEP, but there are many others as well to help grow that understanding and appreciation of what we're trying to do here and why we're trying to do it and why it matters so much. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, John. Emma.
Thank you. Brilliant presentation. Thank you. And I think I'm just echoing and joining together some of the dots of the previous comments that have been made, both in terms of the physical activity sector, where we're absolutely committed to supporting the sector to have a workforce that reflects the needs of our community and our population. And there are some leisure operators like Magna Vitae over on the coast who have actually run some really interesting programmes to recruit people with mental ill health, learning disabilities, because we know that provides the customer coming through the door with those conditions with a much better, more meaningful experience. And then secondly, I think the wider point around the wider VCSE sector, absolutely, you know, if we could help you facilitate some conversations with the wider sector. We've done some work around long COVID with the NHS VCSE sector training platforms, and I can actually see this potentially being a model where we could build on our learning around long COVID, but kind of scale it up and do some similar work around people with autism. Now I'm going to get it wrong, autistic people, there we go. Yeah, so both counts, very happy to link in and support, because it absolutely reflects the needs of our sector and community and voluntary organisations as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? In that case, thank you, and thank you, Emma.
Can I just say a huge thank you, because as I say, I can take everything that's being said, people that haven't watched this, back to the autistic communities that I'm linked in with. And I said it at the ICB board as well. I genuinely think that that kind of commitment is what they want to hear. And so just a huge thank you for people kind of committing to it and signing up. If you've got that senior leadership, it makes all the difference feeding down. So thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you here. Thank you very much for coming. Can we move to the recommendations as they're shown on page 15, and that we review the draft strategy and agree the system priorities within the strategy, that we review the suggested system lead partners for each priority and each agreement, and that we review and agree a one-year work plan with suggested system-wide leads. Is there a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Wright. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That's agreed. We now move on to a verbal report, I believe, from you, Pete. That's correct? Right. Okay. And this is the item 7, which is the Better Lives Lincolnshire, our integrated health and care system.
There you are. That's right, no problem. So what I'm planning to do is just remind people of what's in our integrated care strategy very briefly, work that's undertaken since it being published in January, and then how it kind of coalesces around the different strategies and where it kind of beds in the system, really. So it won't be too long, but I'll just take you through that piece. So next slide, please. So just remind members of the ambition that sits within the strategy. and that's for people of Lincolnshire to have the best possible start in life and be supported to live, age and die well. And that's the core focus of that document, and that feeds into the NHS Joint Forward Plan that's discussed and overarching for the system in terms of our ambition. And that feeds into the next slide, which is our kind of shared aims, and these were in the Joint Health and Wellbeing Board strategy last time round. And there's that focus on prevention and early intervention. So one of our key aims, there's measures within the document on how we kind of look to see if we achieve that. To tackle inequalities and equitable service provision to meet population needs. To deliver transformational change in order to improve health and wellbeing, and to take collective action on health and wellbeing across a range of organisations, which is principally the point of an integrated care partnership, isn't it, in terms of doing that. So there are shared aims that underpin that kind of core ambition that sits within the ICP strategy, and therefore to deliver them, there are 5 priority enablers, which next slide, that we identified in our kind of interim strategy. The first, again, ties in nicely within the JSNAs that we had at the Health and Wellbeing Board around population health and prevention. This is the kind of golden thread throughout the document, and it's like that life cycle model around how we do that. But in this document, compared to the NHS Joint Forward Plan, it's focused on what we can do across the integrated care system. Obviously, that brings in wider partners rather than I previously discussed on the NHS. So how do we tackle that? How do we improve inequality and improve that prevention piece? Second in there is workforce and skills, how we kind of attract and grow our own workforce from within Lincolnshire, and also we support people to improve their own skills and employability opportunities. And that's obviously close working with the LEP and business organisations as well as health and care sector going forward. Third one was around personalisation and personalised care, and really that greater focus on what matters to people, and how we work with people for the service we provide them to make sure it's done. We provide service in a holistic way, and that's an ongoing work in terms of that. There's an element then on community engagement and involvement. And this involves supporting the voluntary sector in terms of the work that they do and attracting funding to the system, but also how do we as an integrated care system engage with the population and make that engagement real meaningful across all kind of organisations. And then finally, an identification on data and information systems, a lot to do in digital, lots to do in terms of shared data to help decision making around care, but also a lot for the population to be able to see their own information, access their own records to help them with their own health and care needs as well, and also that kind of that shared platforms that we do work. So the kind of enablers that were identified into that, and that was what was published in the interim strategy that was published in January. So the stages we've gone through next, we go to the next slide, please. In terms of where we've gone to now, so we've then looked at all that document was produced, we then looked at each of the specific themes in each enabler, and we set out a kind of plan on the page to see what the current position is, because as with all strategies, this work isn't starting from a blank piece of paper, there's already work underway. So we've done an overview of the current position for each of the enablers, identify where there's kind of existing strategic connections, where work's already underway and people are working together, and also where there's gaps that we might need to fill, and then what the next steps are in terms of doing that. So the aim is to try and, where we've got existing kind of organisations working together, to build on that approach rather than come up with kind of new models or new kind of work streams to move this forward. We proposed SROs for each of the priorities, and now we're looking at kind of resource requirement and the actions then to move this forward into the following years as we go forward, and to help the SROs identify kind of what they might need to move that on. So that's on to the next slide, please. So now with each of the SROs, we're going to ask them to review the content of the interim strategy, make recommendations on additional changes required to inform the next iteration, because we are planning to do further engagement in the summer and then publish it in December as well. So further engagement in the summer, then publish in December. We want to further develop and embed the current arrangements to make sure they're fit for purpose for the delivery of the strategy, and where new arrangements are, to try and keep them as simple as possible, but ensure the commitment's there to kind of move forward. So that's where we got to in terms of taking the strategy forward. But then we've looked at, how does this align with the different documents produced across Lincolnshire? So as the next slide says, you can just go to press it 4 times, I think. So we have a health and wellbeing board strategy. the integrated care partnership strategy, we have the district council's health and wellbeing board, health wellbeing strategy, and now we have an NHS joint forward plan. So we've looked at them all. There should be one more. You should be able to press it once more. Should be a box there. And identified a kind of what sits within each one to see kind of, you do want some connection between each document, but you also want to make sure that you're not doing the same work twice. So if you press it again, please. Put this one together. You might need to press it a few times, sorry. So where it's highlighted, the different colours highlight now where each element of different strategy links to other strategies. So there is obviously, if the piece in red, obviously it's covered in three of the documents going forward. So as a key, that's fine, because there's elements where you have to do stuff within your own kind of organisational group, but there is a need to make sure that actually as we develop those are the key enablers going forward, but not duplication of work, and we're pooling our resources to get the best effort out of what we're trying to achieve there. So that new relationship with the public from the NHS, how do we tie that into the community engagement and involvement work within the ICP strategy as well? And also this is working with communities in the district councils. So it's about trying to do stuff collectively, but acknowledging that there are kind of core reasons why you might have your own focus on it as well. If we move to the next slide. And this just simply kind of identifies how we need to continue to work together in terms of the different elements of each strategy, so we don't end up kind of tripping over ourselves or not getting the best out of what we're trying to achieve. And then just finally then, in terms of where do those documents fit in and where do they move on, we can move to the next slide. This is just a simple schematic of kind of the different organisations within the integrated care system and different kind of governance arrangements within that. These are never entirely perfect, I may add, but I think actually, to be fair to Michelle Andrews, who's not here, did a lot of work in putting together, has done a good job in trying to shape this. If you press it once more, you should go to the next slide. She might be 4 times again to press this. We tried to dock in where the different strategies report to. So District Council 1 and through to the District Councils, the NHS Joint Forward Plan into the Lincolnshire Leaders Group, which is the NHS Chairs and Chief Exec's body, and strategy into the Integrated Care Partnership. So it just kind of tries to show, but obviously similar people sit on different groups in this, so we need to challenge ourselves to make sure we're not doing things twice, and we are working as an integrated system in its delivery. I welcome any questions or comments.
Thanks, Pete. So we're down to 4, are we? So next step is 1. We might be declaring UDI, but when we get to 1. Any comments or questions from anyone at all? Derek?
I think this is an ongoing piece of work, let's put it that way, about how we try and refine down from lots of different areas, but recognise the different responsibilities of different parts of the system. And that's what Pete and Michelle have been doing. I've jumped in a little bit, and I think there might be a couple of bits we want to delineate. We talked earlier around digital and technology-enabled prevention and care, and at the moment we're talking about information and data. I think there's an overlap, but I do think that they're separate, and we're talking about how we could articulate that a bit better and where it needs to fit. I think one of the opportunities from some of the background papers is there's a lot of people across all of our organisations involved in different bits of this, and what I'd like to do is try to put a bit of a blanket over it and say, right, we're all working on this area. How do we fit it together? It's not to change individual organisational statutory responsibilities, but there's actually a lot of capacity there. And with a bit of alignment and a bit of fleet of footness, I think we'll be able to move quite quickly on some of these areas. And actually, there's a lot of work going on already. We're just not pulling it together. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to demonstrate the benefit of having a coterminous system between Lincolnshire from a county and district council perspective and an ICP.
Thank you, Derek. Any other comments or points at all? John?
Well done, Pete and Michelle, for pulling that together. It's complex and complicated, but this is a simple system. And that's because the endeavour of improving health and well-being in our communities, as well as improving the delivery of care, is complex and complicated. As part of the overall wrap, I just wonder if there's a slightly sort of bigger ambition that we might want to think about, and that's not just being ambitious about how well we all work together to deliver the outcomes that our population needs and deserves, but also something about how we want to continue to develop Lincolnshire as a whole health and care system, our reputation, the particular challenges we have around our very large rural coastal communities. And there's something about, for me, just about the more we can continue on this journey, the more, how can I put it, an investable proposition we become from government and other partners. You can already see that coming through in all sorts of different ways. But there's a sort of slightly bigger ambition for me. I'm not sure if I could articulate it today, but we want to, I think, think about being exemplary and being seen as being exemplary in terms of the way we work together to meet the significant needs of the population we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I wasn't ignoring him. I was very quickly just trying to find the name of the chap that I went to meet this morning, and I've got it now. Professor Duncan French,
Oh, yeah.
who I know that you and Derek know well, and it was really apparent with the university. Oh boy, we can go so much further, and it's just such a great opportunity, logistically, just over the bridge. Those opportunities that we've got to further what we want to do from a Lincolnshire point of view, it's just opened up a whole new world. So I completely agree with you. Thank you. Okay, we will. The report was for noting, and hopefully everyone is accepting of that. Moving to the final item then, which is the ICP forward plan. Again, this has been circulated with the agenda, and the items are merely for noting. But having said that, if there's anything that you would like adding to that agenda, would you contact Alison or indeed Michelle? And on that note, I will thank you all for attending and wish you a safe journey home. Thank you.